You read that correctly. This dude didn't even know the Philippines existed until he watched a YouTube video about women there. What's sad? I've seen this same type of sentiment several times.
Huge movement of brothers expressing the fact that they are actually, again, going overseas. They're getting their passports. They're not, quote unquote, wasting their time with Black American women, right?
It's quite mind-boggling how redundant this talking point is and how Johnny-come-latelys think they're spewing novel information. Here we go again. If you have followed red pill communities for the past 10 years, you are likely familiar with the talking point about foreign women. The premise is simple. It goes dating in the Western world has become so unbearable that men should seek greater pastures abroad where they'll find fit, submissive, and cooperative women. By mere coincidence, these location gurus advocate men to travel to are poor and developing countries in Latin America, Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands. Because this debate is older than social media itself and the passport community is so broad, I'm not going to try to debunk their narrative nor cover every aspect of the community, so I'm going to have to skip over the classism within the group, their fears that too many Black men traveling will decrease the exotic factor and quote-unquote ruin locations.
At the end of the day, most of these motherfuckers leaving the Matrix, going to other places and bringing Matrix mentalities and mannerisms to places where we don't want that.
The irony of wanting to escape the West but advocate for Canada and Western Europe, how they believe that it's their blackness and not their Americanness that gives them access to women, and the fact that defenders of the group often live vicariously through men who travel.
Black men will continue to travel where the they want to go. There's nothing your ass can do about it. And I dare you, I double dare you, I triple dare you to do something. I quadruple dare you.
Rather, I want to cover 3 subjects. The portrayal of a passport as a status symbol, the glaring omission about what these men are doing while overseas, and the moral superiority complex where Black men in particular claim that it's only non-Black men engaging in nefarious behaviors while abroad. But before we dive into that, let me make something clear. So first, sex tourism is an activity that was once limited to military personnel, middle-aged white men with disposable income for much of the 20th century. Lower airfare costs and the rise of the Black middle class led to a democratization of overseas voyages. Now, sex tourism consists of men and women of all races, ethnicities, and sexual orientations who, like their past counterparts, visits countries with limited economic opportunities. Second, sex tourism doesn't always consist of monetary transaction. It also incorporates access to food, shelter, exclusive nightclub, as well as the promise of romance. The absence of a monetary exchange blurs the line and makes it easier to rationalize one's actions as non-exploitative. With that out the way, further ado. One of the oddest characteristics of the Passportbros is how members of the community portray having a passport as difficult to obtain. Criticize them and they'll immediately claim you're jealous because you don't have a passport, as if it is so difficult to acquire one. All someone has to do is file proper paperwork at the library, post office, or some government institution and pay a $130 fee. Yes, there are restrictions, but it's not as severe as folks on YouTube make it seem. You can have a criminal record so long as you're not under any current form of incarceration, but one might struggle getting into certain countries depending on the offense. You can also get one even if you pay child support so long as it's not an excessive amount of non-payments. The fact that Passportbros cite these 2 examples as why some Black men cannot get passports is a mere reflection of their poor views about Black men collectively, which leads me to why they view having a passport as a status symbol. The answer is simple. They juxtapose their ability to travel and their experiences overseas as a leisure activity few Black men partake in. Although I don't have the clips, I remember back in 2019 when folks were claiming that only 5% of Black people had passport. It's hogwash and the federal government doesn't even track the race and ethnicity of passport holders. But according to the Pew's research forum, about half of Black Americans have traveled abroad, which is low compared to 75% of white Americans. When it comes to having been to 5 countries or more, Black Americans drop to 13%, whereas whites hover around 30%. Overall, Americans don't travel that extensively. But this certainly doesn't make Passport Bros members of an exclusive group. Instead, it reflects their class bias and general contempt for working class blacks who often lack the ability to travel due to lack of paid vacations and disposable income. You'll also find that the main motivation for telling black men to get their passport boils down to, you guessed it, women. It's incredibly disheartening to me that grown men who had never had passports only decided to retrieve one once they discovered they could engage in sexual conquest overseas, which leads me to another area of critique. There's a huge gap between how travel gurus homogenize black men's experiences and what actually occurs on the ground. If you were to take them at their word, you would come away thinking that once you land in a foreign country, you would be the sight of lust and women will be falling to their knees for you. You would also believe that they upstarted an entrepreneurial drive and are bringing jobs to the local economy. Of course, what they exclude is that they often create online dating profiles and meet these women in advance. And these encounters don't always go well. In the WhatsApp group SYSBM Black Men Travel, which I joined on 3 occasions, men tell stories of paying women to leave their companies, women becoming attached too quickly, accidentally sleeping with transsexuals, running into scammers, and getting robbed. In private groups on Facebook, men discuss how much they paid for services.
And you know what I'm saying is true, because like I said, I used to be in these groups. You got some niggas, they just go overseas. They're not going to the local restaurants. They're not going to no museums, no beach. They're just in that hotel room, holed up, different prostitute every day, all day.
Hey, look, there are dudes that do that. I know there are dudes that do that. I'm just trying to understand why that makes him a lesser man for doing that.
Because it's corny. It's shameful.
Some men also engage in risky behavior by having unprotected sex, particularly in a country where STDs run rampant among sex workers.
Fellas, stop going to Sasua and laying with these chicks raw. Stop hitting these chicks raw. Like, what actually goes through your mind to think that you're going to go to Fantasy Island and you're going to hit up a chick raw?
Others admit having sexual relationships with transsexuals, as one expat admitted.
Bro, hey, them niggas from New York, though, they be on them trannies, I swear. Yo, last time I was here, boy, they say I was crazy. I said, bro, I ain't hitting no trannies, bro. They said, man, you tripping. I said, what? That's crazy. Nigga, I'm from the South, bro. We ain't doing the tranny shit. I'm sorry. I'm just keeping it real, you two. I'm just keeping it real.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying every man who travel overseas engage in sexual conquest, but advocates often try to universalize the experiences of travelers and downplay the desire for sex is at the root of this community. Ask yourself why longtime travel advocates still aren't married. Sophomorically, men share photographs and video evidence of their encounters with women in foreign land, calling them receipts. They pose for pictures. Some even share video footage of explicit sexual encounters and partial nudity. Oftentimes, it appears less about sex and more of a performance act to seek validation and credibility from one's peers. Although they're exhibiting the same behaviors as white men who constitute the largest percentage of sex tourists, they view themselves as more morally ethical than white men. Essentially, they acknowledge the dark side of sex tourism, which includes child exploitation, child abandonment, and sex trafficking, but they claim that black men deplore such actions and that only non-black men engage in those activities.
The only partial thing that they may do get shamed for, and these are white, Asian, and Middle Eastern men, is having underage children for sex, which they do that, which is illegal, but nobody says anything about it. Black men don't travel and do that. Black men abhor that kind of stuff. In fact, the
facts, preach BGS, facts.
But the allegation that black men don't engage in nefarious activities while overseas isn't backed up by evidence. Again, I'm not saying that most black men do this, but one should never try to speak for an entire group.
How old is this girl? This girl is in Colombia. He went to Colombia and had sex with this girl. Was on his YouTube page. He took it down when he was live on YouTube and people say, yo, that's a little girl. He cut the live and he deleted it, but not before we got the screenshots.
Although there isn't any federal data that tracks race and arrest records of pedos overseas, and few people are even arrested for it, popular tourist destination advocates tell black men to travel to have seen an increase in child sex trafficking. A United Nations special report labeled the Dominican Republic as a quote child sex tourism hotspot. Furthermore, according to a study conducted by the non-governmental organization End Child Prostitution and Asian Tourism, perpetuators of child sexual exploitation usually have no intention or sole purpose of committing a crime, nor do they commit the crime in their home country. In many cases, they are, quote, not what we would think of as pedos or child sex tourists. They're people who aren't usually attracted to children, and yet, in the situation, they're exploiting children, end quote. That's because it's easy to otherize cultures when you have no attachment to or familiarity with it. The main problem with this discourse is that it romanticizes sexual conquest overseas and ignores the darker themes of sexual exploitations of the global south. Content creators never address the reality that women have conceived the children of sex tourists who grow up fatherless, nor do they discuss the real sexual exploitations of minors besides telling men to avoid them. Nor is there any understanding of the complex political, economic, and social forces that shape these women's lives. These men also show little to no concern about the women in those respective countries who are harassed by foreigners. Young girls born and raised in sex tourist hotspots become sexual targets in childhood. Instead, they sell a myth that the world outside the United States for black men is a playground, one where attractive women are craving for your attention and will treat you like a quote-unquote real man. A place where your mere charm, not the exploitive power dynamics, will grant you sexual access with women sometimes nearly half your age. Black people should certainly travel the world, but remain cognizant of not contributing to the exploitation of marginalized people.